Thanks for coming into the QTS experience.
David, thank you so much. Honestly, it's an honor to be here. I think about the luminaries, visionaries that sat in this chair, and I'm not worthy yet, but I'm thrilled to be here. And thank you, too, for what you do for the industry. We're hiring about 30 people a month right now, and anybody that's going to be on the front line in this space, I send them to your podcast and your library to pick through some of the gems that are out there. It's what are you up to? 250, 300?
Yeah, 250 something. I think by the time this publishes, I think you're going to be episode 251, 252, something like that. That makes it out the door. Yeah. So we've probably recorded closer to 280. Not all of them make it out the door for one reason or the other, technical failure or something. But yeah, a lot of conversations. But you made me jealous of that chair there now. And now I got to switch chairs. So from now on,
am I sitting high?
I want the luminary chair.
Oh,
Usually it doesn't have great back support. So normally it's funny. I get people about my age in about an hour and a half in. They're like, okay, we got to get more lumbar here. Dating us, that gray tsunami.
no, it's fantastic. Very comfortable.
Well, I'm glad you came in. For those who don't know you, you and I have been friends for a while. One, I love to ask people some version of who are you? How did you get to data centers? And for you in particular, I'm curious, why generators? We're going to spend time talking about generators and other things related, but how did you get here to be in the luminary chair today?
Yeah, not to go too far back, but I am a proud graduate of the University of Delaware. That makes me a fighting blue hen. You probably don't know too many of those. I came out of school and went to work for a company called Johnson Matthey. They're one of the largest automotive catalyst manufacturers. I was always interested in engines and how they work, things mechanical. I got a mechanical engineering degree. So I got there at 21 years old, 22 years old. Worked for several years. Ended up meeting my mentor, who was my boss there, a guy named Bill Clary, who was always wonderful to me. Taught me a ton of things. He used to let me just sit in his room and listen to him talk on the phone, which is pretty generous on his part. And then in 1992, he decided that he wanted to go off and do his own thing with a couple of other guys that I knew well. And my loyalty was to him at that point. And so we went off and started MIRATECH in 1992. So we're, 34 years in.
Wow.
So paid my bar tab, packed up the U-Haul, moved from Philadelphia down to Dallas. And at that point, I was sales, customer service, field service.
Were you married yet?
No, that's the beauty of it. Not the beauty of my wife ever listens to it. No, but that's the
If your wife listens to this, I've arrived.
No, I mean, that's what took all the fear out of it. Honestly, I had no commitments, 24 years old, just kind of pick up and go.
Yeah.
And was just very blessed that it all worked out.
Right.
And,
well, the reason why I asked was, if you were married, then your bar tab would have been such that you could have afforded a mover. If you're not married, you started off with the movers in mind, like, get a trailer. I can't afford that.
Yeah, my bar tab was substantial. I was carrying some credit card debt when I put it on the U-Haul. So.
I would mistrust you if you were 24 and that was something like that. Those fighting blue hens, eh?
Well, yeah. At Delaware, if you had over a 3.0, you went to work for DuPont because DuPont is big in Delaware.
Right.
So I had a better work-life balance, so I ended up with a solid 2.7. But that's what led me to Johnson Matthey. So. Yeah, we serviced the oil and gas industry for the most part. Spent a lot of time in Midland, Odessa. I love watching Landman because it brings back old memories.
Yeah.
So we did catalytic converters. We licensed technology from Europe, got North American marketing rights for license or to provide this product from Europe. And we were off to the races. A lot of oil and gas, some generation, some cogeneration. So we were doing both natural gas and diesel, but heavily weighted towards the natural gas things. And then, fast forward to, we did our first data center in 2006. And then in 2020, there was some rule changes out in California that really made our business explode. And it's been just astronomical growth since then.
When you said we did our first data center, was it the same kind of service you were doing for oil and gas? What was the?
Yeah, the technology is very similar. It's still
Okay.
catalytic converters. Obviously, on a diesel, you have a soot issue, a particulate matter issue that the device is a little bit different.
Okay.
But it was a data center in 2006 that just decided we want everything we're doing to be as green as it can possibly be. These backup generators only run 30 hours a year, 40 hours a year, so it's an awful lot of money that you're spending on something that just doesn't pollute a lot, just based on the usage. But they decided to do it. So back then, it was the first time I had ever been exposed to anything like that. They called it an internet hotel, and I remember being like, "What in the heck is this?"
The Internet Hotel. I like it. It makes me want to shake my hips like that kid from Tupelo. What was the size of the data center back then? Do you remember?
It was 4 engines, so 4 2-megawatt diesels. So that would be, obviously 8 megawatts. Data center was probably 6.
Yeah. So that would have been enough for life safety, carry the white space, and you didn't have to put it. Back then we didn't put a lot in. Well, no, I guess we would have. I was thinking of UPS. No, that would be, that'd be a 6 megawatt. If they're 2 megawatt, you'd have 4 to make 3, right?
Sure.
And carry that load. And at that time, probably felt like pretty good sized data
Oh
center.
my goodness, yeah. The idea that somebody would put in that many diesel engines, because we had always been doing hospitals and insurance companies, and people
Right.
have one solid diesel that they trust, and then these guys are putting in. I started to learn about what 5 nines meant and N+1 meant, and we had no
Right.
idea what that was.
Right. How does that process, how do you go from oil and gas prospecting? Did somebody call you and say, hey, we need something here? Or did it just come up organically? Because 2006 was really still pre-cloud. I mean, we're 5 years away from the cloud as we know it matured today. Why were organizations saying, hey, this is what we want?
Yeah, so 90% of the time, our customers are the engine guys. So
Okay.
Cat, Cummins, MTU, Kohler. We're agnostic, so I got to.
Right.
It took me a half
Yeah,
hour to name
that's
them
right.
all, but let's just assume they're all in there.
Right.
So we had developed a really good reputation in that space. So when Caterpillar went into an industry, whether that be healthcare or crypto or whatever they got into,
Right.
they brought us along, because we're technically a vendor to a vendor in the QTS perspective.
Right.
We aren't directly dealing with you. We're hung on the tail end of the engine.
Right. One place I never want to be, hanging
Right.
off the tail end of an engine, but
Yes.
seem to find myself there way more, and usually confused. Like, how did I end up here again? So for people who I don't want to assume that the people listening to this, in my organization, I just heard my CEO say, we expect by the end of this current calendar year to be up to about 3,000 people. For me, that just blows my mind. Not just because we started with just a few, but for the longest time, even when we had dozens of different IT products, we were hundreds, maybe 1,000, but any given time, 800 maybe. And usually somewhere between that 600 to 800 range. But everybody that was in our business or in our company was very familiar with our business. So they knew, in general, data centers, how security worked in general, how power, you mentioned 5 nines before. I wouldn't have to explain what 5 nines was. I wouldn't have to explain concentric zones of security to get to the data. I wouldn't have to explain a lot of these acronyms and terminology that you and I know, and probably people listening to this now, some large percentage of them do not know what we're talking about. Or they were in the IT side, and even the IT people knew something about that. So the data center people knew something about IT. The IT people knew something about data centers, and there wasn't a lot of time, a little bit of time, sort of explaining what the big major components were. Well, now at 3,000 people, we have a lot of people that know how to safely move electrons, or safely move molecules, or safely protect perimeter security or logical security, but they really don't know the data center business. And they're really not even sure, in our case, what a generator is and why. Like, they think they know. They might have it from camping or whatever, but what is a generator? Why is it important? And why would data centers have, whether it's 4 or more, data centers supporting their infrastructure? Can you help us to understand that, what it is and why does it matter?
Sure. So the nines part of it, that's percent reliability. So the
Okay.
grid is generally accepted to be 3 nines, so 99.9%.
Okay.
But you can't handle 80 hours of outage a year if you're a data center.
Right.
You know, there's stats all over the place about what happens, how much millions and millions of dollars do they lose if they go down. I mean, the perfect example was 2 years ago, there was a hiccup at I know we're not supposed to name names,
Data center provider?
a data center provider, hyperscaler, that was utilized by a school district. So there was a hiccup on a Monday morning at about 7 in the morning, and my kids didn't go to school that day because if blank classroom was not available, then nobody was going to school.
Right.
So you think about that, just in our little town, the effect of an outage has such wide-ranging ramifications. It's pretty incredible, let alone the money involved. So when you design these things from the beginning, you're going to support your grid reliability with 2 levels, really. So you can't even handle a fraction of a second of an outage. So what you're going to do is you're going to set it up with what they call a UPS system, whether that's batteries or something called a rotary UPS. You're going to set that up so that when the immediate blip happens, whether it's power quality or an outage entirely, that's picked up by the batteries. Those batteries can probably have a few hours of runtime, but here's where the diesels come in. The beauty of a diesel is that it should start in about 7 seconds and likely to have power quality, everything you need, 480, 60 hertz, everything by 10 seconds, and nothing else can compare to that. So the batteries are just a ride through until you get to your diesels. And then the diesels are going to give you that extra 2 nines of reliability to 5 nines. So it's just redundancy. It's resiliency, redundancy, layered on top of each other. And there's a 140-year history of diesel that filling in this role. So it's tried and true, it's trusted, it's relatively affordable. And it's just been the go-to. It provides on-site fuel storage. You don't want to be, if you think about Sandy or the people who are listening.
Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah, Hurricane Sandy, right. or Uri, the people from Texas.
Right.
Where I live, it's all we ever talk about is Sandy, so I never put the super.
Well, I'm thinking of Sandy from Greece, and I was like, I don't think he means John Repulsive. I think he means the hurricane that came through 20 years ago or whatever.
Important distinction. Thank you for grabbing that. So the Uri is Texas's Sandy.
Right.
You don't want just-in-time fuel supply, so on-site fuel storage is critical, and diesel's perfectly suited to that. So it really is. It's solved all of the issues. It checked all the boxes, and it's been the go-to.
When you mention, because I do this all the time, the nines, 3 nines, 99.9, 4 nines, 5 nines, and when you say 5 nines, you mean 99.999. And I wrote down in my little note here what that means in time.
Right.
So 3 nines is about 8.5 hours. 4 nines is 52 minutes. 5 nines is 6 minutes. So 6 minutes, what we mean by that is the grid or the power supply is not available. So if an energy source is being used to, for example, serve the sheriff's 911 system or ambulance services or life flight or fill in the blank, your sewer system, you want it. There's a misunderstanding, I think, sometimes, and I've discovered this more and more when I talk to people in the energy business. They're like, oh, I can give you 5 nines or 4 nines. And what I want to remind them is, no, hold on. When I say 5 nines, what I mean is 100% up.
Right.
They're like, well, that's not 5 nines, much less 3 nines. 3 nines in some world, which is perfectly acceptable, means that for 9 hours, the pump's not pumping, which could be a lot of money for sure, depending upon your business or whatever, but then it starts back up and it's okay. In my world, if the white space, if these GPU racks lose all power and they're not, or the infrastructure that's cooling them loses all power, for moments, and they're the hottest racks. You've just made multi-million-dollar or more heat sinks. Like they're just right. They're yard gnomes. If it's a storage array, many of the modern IT storage arrays do not fail elegantly. And if they lose power, whatever that looks like throughout all of these conversations we're having, it's not just, oh, look, that was 10 seconds or 30 seconds and it's back. They have databases that are in disarray that have to be resynced to restore them and get them all back up, and airport flight systems, whatever. It is significant. So when we say nines, we mean 100% up. And so I think what you're describing is, so the grid is described as 3 nines. It could, over a 24/7, 365 cycle, have some parts of it that you might have some power sagging. I'm not going to explain that. People can look up what that is, or fluctuation in power quality, so that battery system or whatever the UPS is can ride that through for them for a few moments. But if it's more than a moment or two, then we switch to some other energy source that has to be as reliable as we can make it. Nothing's 100%. But between these two things, we expect to those computer systems, they're always going to have a sweet sip of power because they can't hold their breath. And while some of it may be fun entertainment stuff, most of it is not. So does that sound right, or did I miss something?
Absolutely. So to clarify something I said earlier about these gens might only run 30 hours a year, that 30 hours, 95% of that is testing and maintenance. So every month they'll run for an hour just to make sure everything comes on. Right. They don't typically transfer building load, but they'll turn the thing on, make sure it runs, everything looks good, the rain cap went up. All right, we're good. Yeah. But they feel there's a comfort level there with testing and maintenance that you want to do it every month for sure, maybe every other week, that kind of thing.
And we usually put big old toasters essentially on them and simulate them, overload, underload. Like if it's going to break, we want to break it while it's all okay. Stress those alternators, really get those things humming. I know we're going to talk more about regulation around this stuff, but just in terms of the practical role that this generator's playing, that it is the stand in the gap when the grid, our first choice, is not available. I still need power. I need it right now. I cannot hold my breath. And so we stress them regularly, to your point, maybe more frequently than that. And we stress, and we don't just turn them on. And I'm sure our competitors do something similar as well. But we stress the daylights out of those suckers because we want them not just to turn on, but be able to carry the load.
Yeah, that's a great philosophy because different people look at it differently. If they're trying to stay below an emissions cap, they really pull back on that testing and maintenance. So, so 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, the grid was so incredibly reliable, and it was rare that these things, it would take a superstorm for something like this to happen. What you know today, if any of your followers or know that the grid is more stressed than it's been in a very, very long time. So the run hours, because you have to report your run hours of these backup diesel gens at the end of the year, they're ticking up, and it's because of things like you mentioned, power quality and just being called on more often.
Yeah, it's a fun conversation to have. So now we've got these gens. You've mentioned diesel a lot. Are they typically diesel gen, or is that the go-to fuel, or are they? I know they can come in a variety, but really regularly is diesel like the de facto?
Yeah, it's got to be 95% plus. I mean, folks are always, there's going to be a timeline for diesels. Honestly, we're 130 years in. There's going to be a new mousetrap. Maybe not in my career, right? But I'm going to be reading about it on a chair on the beach, God willing. Right. People will step out and try other things, usually in the battery realm or the natural gas gen realm, but then they'll come back to diesel.
Every time you talk about, say the word diesel, I don't even know that I would notice it 3 years ago. At my data centers, many of them, if not most of them, we have a large diesel infrastructure. many more than 4. We probably have 4 for the bathrooms.
Yeah.
But whatever it is, for those reasons, I have a UPS infrastructure for ride through, condition the power, make it nice and sweet. For my IT load, the computers that are drawing on it, life safety stuff, etc. And then my other infrastructure, my standby infrastructure, has to come on immediately. And I need that standby power. I can't be doing just in time, not just because of Sandy and some of the other events, but traffic congestion around many of the areas we're in. Like it's a thing. And so we have run through of hours, if not days, of ride through until the grid can get stable again. Mm-hmm. And that philosophy may change. Technology's changed. We adapt as we go, but that is a core competency and a core capability that we have. But up until just a few years ago, I didn't flinch at the word diesel. And now, because of the environment we're in, it's almost like saying Mufasa in The Lion King. Like, something seismic happened. And why I'm sensitive to that is because in a similar way for data centers, for 20-something years, nobody, not only did they not notice, if they notice, up to our climax of 2021, there's no way we ride through the difficulty and complexity of COVID without data center infrastructure, voice over IP, facilitating education, healthcare, everything is facilitated in the digital world, and that digital world has to live in a data center for it to be always available, always on, always secure, has to live there. And by definition, in our industry, those buildings were nondescript. They're the most valuable ideas on earth. So we would put a fence around them. You had to have a badge to get in. Nothing nefarious. We just didn't want people without a reason to have access to the data to have access to the data.
Sure.
Seemed to make sense to us. And then starting probably 21, 22, because of, I believe, so much growth related to the services and things within data centers. Some of that's AI training and inference. Some of that is cloud. Some of that is an even bigger multiplier of Internet of Things. Like all these things are additive. And so they, industry and the world saw an opportunity to change people's lives, to facilitate industry, to do all the things that are related to it and accelerate. I know there's a lot of words in my preamble, but all of this goes on. And then communities began getting anxious. And things began getting introduced into the narrative, maybe some with a foundational kernel of truth for a remote, isolated incident, but probably not the industry as a whole. Things around water, things around power, things around cost, things around noise, a litany of things that you and I in our respective organizations and our industry as a whole are spending a lot of time realizing, let's sit down at a table like this, not in a podcast necessarily, but with community members, business, civic, whatever it is, to have real conversations about what it is and what it isn't. So in that same way, it feels to me diesel is in that as well. Diesel, you want to use diesel for these accelerated things. And I'm not sure, I'm not educated in it. I know that you spend a lot of time in the world of generators, and in this case, diesel's the fuel for these generators. What misinformation, what misunderstandings exist? Why is this important? Not just the role of the generator, but why diesel? And maybe we pick that up there and take that forward.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Every time I hear the phrase "dirty diesel," I cringe.
That's a phrase I haven't even heard that. I've heard of "Dirty Diana." Some kid out of the Motor City sang about that back in the day with his moonwalking and stuff, but I haven't heard about dirty diesel.
Yeah, it's out there way too often. I'm too old to be on Facebook, but it's on LinkedIn often enough that I'm just like, ugh. It's an education. You said the word education. Yeah. That's the problem. Absolutely.
So where did it come from? Why are we talking about dirty diesel?
Just because you're next to the truck at the stoplight and the light goes green and everybody smells it and sees it, and that's your grandfather's diesel. I mean, it is what it is. Now they're 80% cleaner than they were in the 70s without pollution control. So then what we do is another 95% on top of that. So what you want to do, what the end goal is if these diesels are really going to be running to support the grid, and we'll get there, you want them so quiet and other than water vapor, it virtually impossible to see the emissions coming out of that. And the technology exists for that.
Right.
Not if the boundary line of your facility is 10 feet away, but if there's any distance at all, the silencing technology is there and the emissions controls are there, but it's expensive. But as you said, there's a lot more to it. There's the diesels, the cooling. I mean, everything about it is. So they did that ratepayer protection pledge a few weeks ago, where basically they said all of the
Who's they?
I'm sorry, the big data center operators, the coalition got together and went to the Trump administration and said, we're going to make sure that the infrastructure needed to support our data centers is not going to be borne on the backs of the ratepayers.
That's right.
So the registered voters, ratepayers,
Right. Gotcha.
same thing.
Okay.
So to do that, it's a peak power problem. It really is. You're not going to be having to build the transmission lines that have a 15-year window or build a ton of generation. More and more papers come out about it's a peak power problem. If the word of 2025 was flex, in that you hear that a lot with flexing your load, that just means coming off of the grid, either partially or entirely. The word for 2026 is utilize, and that is increase the rate base. Actually, data centers can do that. They can come into a new town or a new geographic area and pay for more infrastructure. The key is they get off when times are tough. When you get anywhere near a reserve margin on the capacity of that grid, the data centers exit. And that's where the diesels can play a role, or any on-site generation.
Right. So why diesel? So I'm ignorant. I know there's gasoline. I've heard rumors of hydrogen. I've heard number of fuel sources. Why is diesel the fuel source that we want to use? For now, and we're talking about a point in time. We're not talking forever, but right now. We'll come to future stuff, but right now, why is diesel the go-to?
It's the only way to avoid the just-in-time fuel supply. I mean, if you have 48 hours of diesel on site, you have 48 hours of runtime. It doesn't matter, earthquake, Superstorm Sandy, there's no infrastructure that you're relying on other than your tank that's on site.
Right.
So that's, other than it being everything else that I was saying, reliable and affordable and trustworthy, you don't want to rely on what you'd call a firm gas contract. Every time Dan Crosby's on this podcast, I listen to it like 5 or 6 times. Yeah. You could have that guy back.
Well, we're going to have him back. Yeah.
You could have
He's
him back
amazing.
every 6 months and fill 2 hours of new, because it's changing all the time.
Can I just pause? I'm not going to go in just for a second. I'm not going to go into great detail. I just recently learned of a personal story about Dan.
Okay.
A behind the scenes story. This is like learning about one of your favorite actors who's really successful, really capable, and then you find out that they fund something, some private human flourishing thing, and they don't want anybody to know. So I'm not going to get into those details because it's a very personal story of the situation that Dan's helping to support. But when you hear stories about people that you admire and respect, because normally we just highlight where they're regularly human. And I'm sure Dan's got plenty. When he hears this, he'd be like, oh, God, don't lift me on, of all people. He is a Texan, so don't lift me on a pedestal. But I just heard from the source of a behind-the-scenes true life story of Dan and some people close to him that stepped in the gap to really help another human in a meaningful way. Didn't get him anything in life. Just helped them in a way. So whatever else we talk about as people, when you get to help other human beings live, survive, thrive, like at the end of your life, you want some nugget. So whatever the sum of your life is, your kids or whatever. And I just heard that story and it just filled my heart with joy. So you just provoked that. I'm also on the Dan Crosby fan club, but he has a big brain. We'll have him back on soon.
Yeah, he's on other podcasts too. I just
Yeah.
listen to it over and over again. So I'm an amateur as far as the fuel supply.
Right.
But he's taught me is that the firm gas contracts are only so firm. So and we are very much in the on-site natural gas. We have some of our best customers. Our largest projects
Right.
are behind the meter natural gas engine projects.
What does behind the meter mean?
Yeah, so it's on-site generation. So the grid is on. Yeah, you think of the meter at your house. The grid
Right.
is on the wires on the other side of the meter from your
Right.
home. And if you're doing something, the term island comes into play there. If you can separate from the grid, if the power ceases to come in those wires through your meter, that's behind the meter generation.
Right.
So it's becoming, and it's funny when you talk about diesels from 2006
Right.
and the idea that there was backup diesel generators back then, that is still behind the meter.
Right.
It's still behind the meter generation, but the more it's the more popular thing right now is talking about a continuous operating power
It's
plant.
the primary source. Usually when people say, at least my experience today, when they say behind the meter or they talk about microgrid, like we've had microgrids ever since we've had UPS in a data center, right? It's its own little grid. When we say microgrid, and I think where you're going is with behind the meter is the grid. You plug into it. Somebody else is responsible for it. I'm a consumer of it. It meters how much I consume and sends me a bill.
Right.
Behind the meter is, and I'm not responsible for the infrastructure of the grid or the meter. They're responsible. My tax dollar, whatever, my rates go to that. Behind the meter is, I build the fuel supply in, whether it's in storage or it's a pipeline to it. I build the infrastructure that's turning a turbine or a generator or whatever. I have to maintain it. I have to patch it. I have to resupply it. I have to expand it. I'm responsible for all of it. And it's my primary source. It may be my only source. So to your point about the island, it is, I am a grid unto myself. I think that's what you mean.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and that so even the folks that do that, even the people that might make a 50, 100 megawatt power plant on site will quite often still have diesels because of the gas supply. The idea of a firm gas contract, if everything hit the fan, and it did during Superstorm Sandy, I hate going back there, but if you live through it,
Yeah.
it's been 13 years. It seems like yesterday,
Right.
but when there was fires in Jamaica, Queens, they actually shut off the gas supply to turn the fires out. So it is firm, but it's not on-site firm.
Right.
So unless you come up with LNG storage or some other way to do storage of natural gas on site, you can create a virtual pipeline, and some of our mutual friends do that.
Right.
But the comfort level that you get from on-site 48 hours of your fuel being there is unlike anything else.
I got you. And diesel plays the best role in that, better than natural gas. Or like if we're ignorant, if we have no understanding of why you would store one fuel, like at my house, I could have a propane tank if I wanted to. I presume I could do diesel if I wanted to. I could do solar if I wanted to. I could, like, there are a number of energy sources I could do. You're saying that for reliability, cost, access. The other thing that I thought about, my scuba instructor, so if you ever get in scuba, let me know, is French. Don't hold that against him. I love him. Christian. He was a diesel mechanic.
Okay.
And still is a diesel mechanic. Now he's down in Florida, he and his wife, Sheila. And I was like, why, of all things, why diesel? It's universal. It's everywhere in the world. There's so many people trained in it. There's so much gear in it. Now, it may change. Inevitably, it will change. But there's no place on earth, really, that I cannot go. I can go into a little Caribbean island, and there is diesel gens, sailboats. They have little diesel engines on them, many cases, like over and over and over. It's everywhere. It's the supply is available. The infrastructure is available for all of these. The talent to come and service it is available.
The fuel stability is also critically important.
What does that mean, fuel stability?
The idea that if you don't want a lighted flame near your lawnmower gas tank,
Right, probably.
Yeah,
I'm going to hide my hand.
A diesel, a diesel. The the fuel will be there, and it's non-combustive in the sense that it's not going to explode.
Right.
So is it probably the best way to look at it. And I mean, you and I have talked about this before. I seem to have an obsessive compulsive thing around diesel. It should be a capital D at all times. If you're driving down the road, it is ubiquitous. If you drive around, you see the word diesel 20 times a day.
Right.
To your point about it being everywhere, it should be a capital D. There really was a guy, Rudolph Diesel.
Right.
Yeah, I recommend the book, The Mysterious Case of Rudolph Diesel. It's fascinating, his life story. But that was the appeal in the beginning, too, was that here's this fuel that's stable, incredibly efficient. Like your diesel car will get more miles to the gallon than a gasoline car. So there's a lot going for it. The Achilles heel to it was always the emissions, and that's where we try to play a role in fixing that.
Okay. And so now, like data centers, there's misinformation. You mentioned dirty diesel. Am I wrong in that? Is there a lot of pushback or people trying to say, let's get rid of diesel? By people, I mean community saying, well, if you bring in a data center, that means they've got to bring in this other infrastructure here, and we don't want that. Or are you not experiencing that level of pushback?
It's always been there, and it's getting significantly worse. There was 7 what they call 202C events this winter, which are federally declared emergency. So it's kind of all hands on deck as far as generation is concerned. So when a DOE issues a 202C order, that means you basically can run your diesel generators with a get out of jail free card, in that the hours don't count. You're supporting the grid. It's critical infrastructure.
Because to not have energy is such a disaster that for now we're going to suspend this so that we can provide life safety services, et cetera.
Exactly. When the grid goes down, it goes down. It's not an easy turn the light switch back on kind of thing.
Right.
So that is where the paranoia comes from, that rolling brownouts are one thing, but if you get a total grid collapse, it could be days before you get the grid back up again.
Right.
So they're going to take whatever precautionary measures they need to keep it going. And 202C orders are just the federal instrument to do that. But when the word came out in Data Center Alley up in Ashburn that there was a 202C order, the general public literally were stationed across from data centers with their camera phones. And when the diesels came on, it was posted on Facebook and LinkedIn and everything. It's a huge PR problem, absolutely a huge PR problem. So the education around that really has to come to realizing that the grid isn't an emissions-free power source. Your zero emissions vehicle is not really an accurate name for that car.
Why?
Because the power plant did emit something to create that power, and then you have something called line losses where you generated that power 300 miles away. You got to send it across the transmission lines to the distribution system, potentially switch the voltage a number of times. There's transformers involved. There's losses at every part of that system. So we start talking about what we call GVU, which is comparing the environmental impact of the grid creating that power versus you creating that power on site. Once you clean those diesels, or even better, once you clean the natural gas engines on site, they're usually significantly better than the environmental impact that was caused by the grid. But it's just, when you talk about plugging something into your wall, you don't think of the emissions associated with that. So outside of Quincy, Washington, which is 90% hydro, certainly in Dominion's territory, and this isn't throwing stones at Dominion, they're amazing, incredibly environmentally focused, forward-thinking utility. But they do have coal that they've wanted to retire that they can't. They have some nuke, which is emissions-free, but when you look at their whole generation mix, if you wanted 30 megawatts for an hour in the Ashburn zip code, you're actually creating about 20% more pollution than if you generated those 30 megawatts for an hour with on-site generation. And that's an education process, trying to understand that just because it's your closest coal plant is 30 miles over into West Virginia, it's that pollution. If you watch Al Roker and the weather, it comes right across.
Right. I just think when we're so disconnected, it's like being disconnected the food from our plate. when the food was right out back, or at best at the farmer's market right up the street, and you knew who grew it and you knew who raised it and how it was treated and whatever, food was healthy, or like there was a lot, or at least you had more information, like you really. And now we're disconnected from it because it's at the Publix or Kroger or whatever it is right up the street, and or Trader Joe's, and it looks like this. And so there's a lot of information out there about, well, it says this, but it actually, this is what it means. I recently learned that, not to say diesel has anything to do with chickens, but we have some chickens right up here north of Atlanta, and cage free, they were still in just a big giant warehouse.
Oh, okay.
Free range, they have in this one thing that I was shown, they have a gate a little bit bigger, or a opening a little bit bigger than this, maybe 2 pieces of paper wide, and they have a little small pasture area. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm not throwing shade. I don't know if that's every or just that one instance. Maybe it's just the one instance. My point is that I'm disconnected from it. I read something that says, hey, these are grass-fed. Hey, these are free range. Hey, these are cage free, and it's more humane. And you look at it maybe incrementally more, but not what I imagine. So I'm disconnected in that instance from those things. And I am sure I don't need a bunch of chicken hate. I eat me a lot of chicken. There are probably gazillion farms out there that do it exactly the way we imagine. But I think back to fuel, if you're, for me, the irony that we've experienced in sitting down, first, we've had to not be defensive. That's very difficult to do. Mm-hmm. Second of all, we appreciate the irony when somebody is standing with their phone to post to social media platform of some sort. They're concerned about something. I completely support that idea. But if you're criticizing, it feels to me like you're criticizing the electrons on your phone, because if that diesel gen or the grid or whatever didn't run, you would have no platform to connect to, because it's probably in that building. You're probably rallying people around. And if it's not that building, it's that one up there, or some combination of buildings. The formula for Coca-Cola is not in a physical safe, other than maybe in the museum. It's on a database in somebody's data center. And so just that, I'm not saying that we should not have healthy, is this the right use of power? Is this the right use of space? Is this the right level of the right use of the land, of traffic patterns? We should all be heavily involved in urban planning. But you need to appreciate the thing that's landing on your phone or the thing that's landing on your plate. Educate yourself, not just from one news source that may have an agenda, and not just this other news source that probably also has an agenda. We're finding that in our politics and in all of the other discussions. Do it here as well, so that you can find out. This may be imperfect, and I'm not endorsing or criticizing diesel or any other fuel. Bring it under real scrutiny, but what role is it accomplishing? How effective is it? Is there something else that could be done at a price point that we can afford, at a safety point, at a environmental support point? And if there isn't, then on our way to paradise, we got to eat.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we'd all agree it's critical infrastructure. There's just this weekend, I was with my son who recently learned how to drive. We came over a ridge and there was a backup. Uh-huh. And he's like, how long is this going to be? And I was safe. I'm not going to pretend I was looking at my phone while I was driving. Well, we were stopped.
Right.
But I'm like, oh, it's supposed to be 5 minutes. Back in the day, and you probably remember this, you come over that ridge, it's stopped. You could be there for 5 hours. Yeah. You have no idea. I mean, the reliability, everything about it. And this, to defend, well, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm going to be a smart aleck. I remember a couple things like that happening. And I remember stopping one time, and because you didn't know it, because it was like around the corner. So not that far, not even a quarter mile. But I'd hop out of the car and run down into the ditch and go to the bat. Like, I don't know how long it's going to take. Like, just pee on the tire. Like, and today, people would film you doing that. You'd probably go to jail. But, at 18, 17 years old in Southern California or whatever, you come around, a boulder could have rolled down from the side of the hill. It could have been a crash, could just been we have no idea. And so it was just such a different. I would probably like if we had seatbelts in that thing. You had 8 FM radio stations and 3 AM that kind of worked during the day. Like that was the thing. And now you, to your point, while you're stopped, we'll make sure we notify that. And you can pull up your app and it tells you not only how long the delay, what the source of the delay is, what other people are saying about the delay, and maybe is it worth backing up and kind of working your way around and taking another route if that's doable, right? All of those things. And then, well, let's just lean back for this delay and throw on a podcast or some music or have my device at some point is going to be true. Wake me up when the cars in front of me start to pull away.
Yeah. Our industry's got a big black eye right now. But if you look back, I'd like to just toot our own horn for a little bit about renewables in this country. I know everybody wants your backup source of power at a data center to be wind, solar plus batteries, and that's not realistic on several fronts. But right now, wind and solar in this country is less than 10% of the total grid supply, and it would probably be half of that if it wasn't for data centers. So as much as we can take heat from people saying, well, I'm in Virginia, what good is it that you built a windmill in Iowa and you got RECs and transferred them over? Well, that windmill in Iowa wouldn't have been built if we weren't committed to our carbon footprint goals that we've set out. So our industry has funded renewables. If you could do this study on that, I'm sure it's half of all renewables.
Well, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it's spectacularly well documented, usually at our own expense, because we want a robust, reliable grid. And if intermittent power works for that, let's get intermittent power in the grid when we can take advantage of it. But it doesn't work for base load when it's going through its intermittent stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an education process. I go to a lot of these public forums where it's usually about 4 hours. The county will hold some meeting and they'll start it at 4 and it goes till 9. And you get a pizza and each side goes up and speaks their piece for 30 seconds or 60 seconds. Right. And you just hear, it's sad because you see a lot of these folks emotionally impacted by this and you really feel for them. But a lot of it is the education, and we have to push back to an extent, but with the facts behind us and the education behind us. And I think this talk about utilizing the grid more and potentially pulling ratepayer base, what you're paying at your house for electricity down is a worthwhile argument because it really makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about it here in Georgia. Earlier, you said something that people may not be familiar with. You were talking about peak power. We've got a peak power problem, or we're trying to solve for peak power, or something like that. What did you mean by that?
So, pick PJM for example. So
What's
PJM is a section of the grid, if you will. Okay. It's almost like an air traffic control for the grid in the eastern part of the United States. Okay. They put out something called the load duration curve, is how much of the grid is being utilized versus its capacity. So if you were to add up all the power generation sources and say that's a gigawatt, it's not. It's a lot more than that. Right. But you all add them all up and it's a gigawatt. If you average the usage of that gigawatt potential capacity over the year, where are we typically? And it ended up being less than 50%. So we have more than enough capacity. We have transmission, we have distribution. It's set up. For 350 days, we're fine. We're totally in the clear. Actually, it's kind of a waste. We have so much generation. But all of that infrastructure has to get paid for. So you take the number of people that are paying a utility bill, buying power, and you bill them for that. If you use more of that capacity, you end up lowering the utility bills for everybody because you've got more revenue versus your expenses. The issue is peak. So peak would be that last 5% where everything is hitting the fan as far as environmental factors, hiccups in the system, a a plant might come down for maintenance or whatever. So if your gigawatt, once you go north of 900 megawatts and you have a gigawatt cap, you start pulling a bunch of levers to try to figure out how do we make sure we don't go over that gigawatt, because it is a real-time world. PJM, any RTO has got to always be balancing generation with consumption on a second by second basis. Right. So the peak power would be that last 5% where you're getting close, and what they call your reserve margin gets really, really low. That might be 100, 200, 300 hours, depending on where you are. If large loads like data centers can get off the grid, it's what they call demand response. It's actually, instead of finding more capacity, you drop your load, and it's usually a voluntary exercise where you call those folks up. It's complicated, but you basically call them up and you say, get off the grid for the next 8 hours. That actually is the answer, and everybody seems to agree on it. They used to call it demand response. They call it flex now. They call it curtailment-enabled headroom, depending on what papers you're reading. But it's all the same thing. It's the idea that if whatever large load can remove themselves for a period of time, it solves our problems.
In a very weird way, that reminds me of classic rock. I know you knew we were going there, but it does. We have an amphitheater here in the Atlanta area with several of them. Okay. And 99% of the time, 92% of the time, traffic is not a problem around this amphitheater. It's fine. It's easy. It's quiet streets. It's whatever. But 5 to 8% of the time, some classic rock, Styx and Foreigner, my most recent visitation, and it is a gridlock of traffic and whatever. And so what they ask the community in the area, hey, if you don't have to be on the road that day, please don't. They bring in extra police. They make two-way streets into one-way, and it's for a period of hours.
Right.
For 4 hours, and it's not even the attending, it's the venue's over. One, we want to screen for the knuckleheads that thought those 4 32-ounce drafts were a great idea, and I'm going to drive. Probably not so much. We don't want you get an Uber. So we've got that. We've got that screening process, but they bring in supplemental stuff. They coordinate with the community, and they say, for this little bit of time, we have to make an amendment. And to the degree that you can help us and we can bring in extra infrastructure, we're going to do it, which is sort of this version of, hey, data centers, you can run for 6 hours or 8 hours or 10 hours. And by the way, not in every case, I'm sure, but regularly we can, with some degree of accuracies, predict when we need it. Historically, it's looked like this. Certainly, these are the key markers. When we start hitting these stages, start being aware of that. And so long as we've got sophisticated communication tools and a process by which to do it, to your point, I think there's not just, I know there's a willingness to say, how do we cooperate with that? Because what we want is, I want more of that capacity that's available, because while generation is tough, building out the transmission and right-of-way, even if the whole community's for it, we've so filled up our other right-of-ways that it's just difficult to find paths for new transmission and then to do the distribution once we're there. And so it's this engagement. Where that works great is when the community shows up and says, okay, we want the benefits, but this is hard and it's messy and we don't want to be at risk. My AC's got to work. The operating room's got to work. Like, these things got to work. How do we do that? The infrastructure providers like us show up and say, okay, we want access to grid for most of the time, and we'll find a way to do this with you. And then the third leg of the stool is the infrastructure people on the meter, the grid itself, not the behind the meter people. And when the three of us come together, pulling towards the same thing, even if we have different agendas, but we're trying to get, again, on that path to paradise, well, we see it overcome over and over and over. We introduce smart legislation. We create good guidelines. Independent technology companies create the tools to facilitate that communication and the operations both in the data center and in the grid. Like all of these things that the community gets the benefits that they're looking for. It is that like that in this podcast studio, it feels like, oh, there you go. But is that a real thing? Is that evolving? And do you see it in regulation or the marketplace evolving like this?
Yeah, I mean, the data demand response has been around for 30 years. In the data center space, they were less than interested because you do get compensated to be at the ready. You
Right.
get compensated because the utility doesn't have to build that transmission line or add more capacity because they know they've got you locked up for getting off when they need you. And the data centers, quite frankly, weren't interested in the revenue because they thought when they balanced things out, the reliability issues of flipping building load on and off of diesels was a little too scary. But now with what's happening to our grid on a national basis, they really don't have a choice. It is going to be what it is. But I think about I was asked to present at a data center in Frederick, Maryland a year ago. And we were all on stage and we were telling our story. And then we broke for lunch and we were walking between the venue to the lunch hall. It was at a community college. And there was a gauntlet, picketers, signs, TV cameras, the whole thing. And they were rightfully upset about a new transmission line that was coming through Maryland and doing eminent domain, and the right-of-way was cutting through some national parks. I mean, it was ugly. Had nothing to do with the data center. The data center in Frederick was not getting that power, but they didn't understand that. But if you had sat down with one of those folks with their picket sign about no eminent domain and said, how about this data center runs for 50 to 100 hours a year, and you always hear a data center, it's kind of like a little bit of a hum, but let's say that sound changes a little bit. It's not to the point where it affects your ears or your health or anything like that, but the frequency changes, and you might see a little bit of smoke for 50, 100 hours a year, but then we don't have to build that transmission line. They would take that deal all day long.
Right.
So it's kind of a pick your poison thing.
Right.
You and I are maybe a little biased because we're in it, but I really believe that this flex demand response thing solves the immediate grid concerns. I mean, long term, there's a lot of viable technologies that are going to come out over the next 3 or 4 years that may be a cleaner fix, but in the short term, I can't see anything better than this.
You had mentioned to me that there's some legislation, things going on with the EPA. I'm not familiar with it. I don't understand it. One, am I understanding that question or that idea correctly? And if I am, can you articulate it?
Yeah, so I have had the good fortune of having a working relationship with the EPA for about 30 years. Okay. And the rules that affect stationary diesel engines were written about the year 2002 with an effective date of 2006. And if you ever hear the terminology around diesels about Tier 2 and Tier 4, that's from a federal regulation called the New Source Performance Standard. So it's really, and wave at me if I get too far into the weeds.
I love it because you do this with me, and this is our agreement. You have to go technical enough to be accurate and your inbox not get full of, wait a minute, Jim, but not so technical that some of the 1,500 new people that I have here, AKA me, can't keep up. So we'll track along. I may interrupt you on occasion, but keep going. Go in the weeds. We'll let you know if it's a little too weedy.
So there is, like any other thing, there's a separation of the rules at the federal level and the rules at the local level, whether that's state or city or whatever. Okay. So let's just start at the federal level. So the EPA in their charter had to write what they call a new source performance standard for anything that pollutes anything. So a turbine has a new source performance standard, a boiler, an engine, a dry cleaner. We talked about that. Right. A dry cleaner has a new source performance standard about how much pollution can be created by the equipment. And the idea of that program was every year the manufacturer has a goal so many years out of making that source cleaner to begin with.
Okay.
So that's where the tier 2 thing comes from. In 2006, an engine manufacturer, and I'll just, Caterpillar comes to mind, although we love them all. Caterpillar in 2006 had to start making their engines tier 2, which is, again, significantly cleaner than anything before that.
Okay.
They also had the goal of making it tier 4 by 2015. So they had 2015 as a deadline to make it 95% cleaner.
So if we were thinking about this, if I'm thinking about this like a gasoline engine, somebody comes along and says, hey, that Olds that used to drive that got 10 miles to the gallon, by this year, it needs to get 14 miles to the gallon. And I'm maybe that's the wrong thing, but by like it needs to be more efficient or whatever. I need you to see incremental improvement so that by some end date in the future, it is exponentially more efficient or whatever. Now, I as a consumer say that's fine, but I still got to afford it, and I still got to I got to get to where I want to go in comfort and all of those other things. And my buddy and I know I'm interrupting, but you prompted this. We were talking about diesel. He was showing off. Pretty sure it's a GMC truck, his GMC truck that he drives to Florida every other weekend. He gets 42 miles to the gallon, and I'm standing next to his truck. It's a twin turbo or turbo truck, diesel. He's like, I get 40 miles to the gallon on average. Can you tell standing here by smelling or listening this is a diesel? No, it's not quite as quiet as an electric vehicle, obviously, with just silence, but it's quieter than my 250 F-250 that's right next to it.
Yeah, sure.
And he's like, yeah, it's probably got more torque. It's got much greater fuel efficiency. It's got 400-mile range, and it's whisper quiet. I was shocked. So as somebody maybe 20 years ago saying, hey, we're going to get diesel trucks like this, I'd be like, well, whatever. I doubt that. And I'm not trying to sell diesel. I'm just saying that as technology evolves, if that's the outcome. Now, I can't afford it. It's a gazillion dollars, but it's an amazing vehicle.
Yeah. It's a good analogy. You're talking about greenhouse gases there versus pollution, but it's the same program. It's absolutely the same program. So if you're Mr. Caterpillar and you started making tier 2s in 2006, and in 2015 you knew you had to make them 95% cleaner as tier 4s, you had that plan, you had that runway to make it cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. The way the EPA wrote the rules, they were in a hurry. They were getting sued. It happens every day. So they actually took some wording from the on-highway world and put it on the stationary side, and the whole thing was kind of a convoluted mess. I love the people there, and they're
doing the best they can.
They got a lot.
Yeah.
They got a lot on their plate.
Yeah.
So one of the things that was not built into that rule was you had to buy the engine as either a tier 2 or a tier 4. You couldn't change the duty cycle. What I mean by that is there was an exemption. If it was strictly emergency, if you were never going to use it other than lights went out and you could do some testing and maintenance, less than 100 hours, you could still buy a tier 2 in 2015. But if you were going to run it for demand response, like what we're talking about, flexing, getting off the grid, you needed to buy it as a tier 4 certified engine. And there was no mechanism in that rule to upgrade your tier 2 to a tier 4. You had to basically say, all right, I have all this bank of tier 2 engines. I want to do demand response now. And the way the rule read was you rip them out and you go buy new ones. You couldn't clean them up.
Gotcha.
And it was just, it was a misunderstanding about how the whole thing works.
Right.
So there's a new spirit of cooperation at the EPA and we're not going to get into politics, but there's a new spirit of cooperation. They understand the importance of winning the AI race, and they're saying, you know what, if it supports the grid, it allows data centers to continue to expand and do what they need to do, then let's fix the wording in this rule. And we see that coming out. There's a lot of stakeholders involved with this, so it's not EPA just telling me. There's data center folks and there's engine folks, and everybody's in EPA saying we all want the same thing, which rarely happens.
By the way, I've seen, again, not getting political, but I have seen a number of not just red, but blue state governors, Congress people, senators participating in these conversations, usually in a, again, I'm not an expert, but just in my casual feed, I've yet to hear them say, do whatever you want. That's not what they're doing, but it is make sense. How do we do this? Capturing both the need that we need to do to be successful today, but we don't want to lose the spirit of our end goal of pollution emissions or any of these other things. So how do we do that? And where does truth and science take us? Like that's sort of part of they seem to be pretty willing. Again, my very casual, so I'm probably going to get an inbox full of, you're an idiot, look at this, nobody's willing. But it seems like here's where this study shows, these are the details, these are the results, and here's why it makes sense as we progress. Is that a mischaracterization?
No, that's dead on. So okay. I was at a conference 3 weeks ago. It's hard to keep track. At the Air and Waste Management Association.
Really?
I know you're jealous. You weren't there.
It sounds cool. I'm writing it down.
So the head of the EPA is a guy named Lee Zeldin. And then 2 down from him is a gentleman by the name of Aaron Szabo. And he was good enough to come and give the opening keynote for this meeting. And he just,
what was his name?
Aaron Szabo.
Aaron Szabo. And who's he with? He's with the administration?
He's EPA. He's way up at the EPA. And he addressed this issue specifically. And he said, it's taking us a while to make this rule change. It's in the works. It's taken us a while to make this rule change because never before has an industry come to us and said, we want to be cleaner. They're so used to reacting to folks trying to get out of pollution controls. Right. And here's the data center and the engine manufacturers coming to EPA and saying, we want to be able to turn these tier 2s into tier 4s and make them 95% cleaner. And your rule doesn't allow us to do that. And he's like, that's what's taking us so long there's no mechanism internally at EPA for people who want to be proactively cleaner. But we're going to get there. Mm-hmm. And there's state regulations. You mentioned state and local. There's something called Senate Bill 6 in Texas, which basically mandates that data centers over 75 megawatts have to flex their load. So it's almost, this is crude, but it's almost like a marijuana analogy where there's states allowing you to do this.
Right.
Not that states want you to use marijuana, but openly advocating for
how do I decriminalize or these other things, right? That same momentum. We have a thing that is a burden. Our community wants it. We're trying to figure out the best way. How do we do it in a way that makes sense for our children, for ourselves, for our economics? Like, let's engage. Let's not hide from it and demonize it. Texas has been famous with prison reform and other things. Same idea. How do we embrace it and find a way forward? That's what it sounds like you're describing.
Absolutely. And the data center space is in a tough spot because they can comply with local regs all day long and clean up their gens. But as long as this federal reg is out there lurking, not that there's a ton of enforcement, you just don't want the PR associated with a federal fine for doing something. You could literally get a federal fine for cleaning up your gens without the okay. Yeah. So we're very excited that it might seem like nothing, but it's going to be huge in that it gives the flexibility for everything else we're talking about to happen.
Has that already happened, or is it still?
No, we're waiting. They said late spring. I asked somebody yesterday what that means. They said July 3rd. So
wow, sounds just like the data center business.
We'll see what happens, but and I could be wrong. You never know. And usually these things do get legal quickly after they make the announcement. But because it's an environmental benefit, it's grid support, it's everything we're talking about. I can't imagine the legal wranglings lasting too long, but I could be wrong.
And it feels pretty bipartisan. Like that's the other thing that I like. There are states of governors different than the current administration, states of governors similar to the current administration, and they are trying to find a way to have economic opportunity in their states, but keeping the spirit of what their citizens, like we live where we live on purpose. We move there or migrate there or stay there because we're aligned with similar. And that's one of the great things I think about our republic is that you can shift. But what they have in common is I want a clean, safe, environmentally healthy spot. And at the same time, not giving up that, I need infrastructure that supports the future. And if there's a way to do that in an economically viable, sustainable way, let's do it. Let's fix what we had to do in a hurry and be purposeful about it and iterate. Like that seems to be the right thing. We got a long history of that in the US where we write down something in our Constitution or our Bill of Rights or whatever, then we don't live it out very well, some of it, and so we fix it. And hopefully, right?
Yeah.
So it sounds like that's what they're trying to do now.
Yeah.
Are you optimistic this is going to?
Incredibly optimistic about it. And it's a short-term fix. I mean, we keep saying that is if the long-term goal is alternative energy of some sort, SMRs, whatever, we still have to look at what's going to happen. It's, right now where I live, it's in the 90s this week in Philadelphia, and there's going to be a strained grid. So in the short term, we have to fix it. And this infrastructure is already there. I mean, there is gigawatts of backup diesel generators that are candidates to be cleaned up if they're not already cleaned up, and that can enroll in these programs and support the grid.
Well, I want to now pivot, if you don't mind. I want to go to, so we've talked about diesel, why they're here, their role, why it's important. They're here for the moment as other things are evaluated and evolve. Let's talk about that. What's coming? Maybe not predicting how long diesel's going to be around, but what's coming in? Do you think there's going to be a growing, like Dan was on the show, gosh, it's been over a year now, so I need to come back. He's been on Kirk's show. He's been on some others. Obviously he needs to come back here, but as we're evaluating over time, the flirtation and experimentation with behind the grid, some evolving quickly and still thoroughly, some pausing depending upon who the provider is. There's a lot going on there. As the conversation continues to evolve, what's coming next? We will end up in small modular, but maybe we talk about some of the other technologies between now and nuke. What do you think is going on?
Yeah, I mean, that's a crystal ball. I mean, it's a guess. There are legislation. All right, so let's say the EPA does this. The EPA says, okay, you can turn your tier 2s into tier 4.
Yeah.
That addresses pollution. It NOx, CO, hydrocarbons, things that harm you today.
Right.
What it doesn't address is greenhouse gases. So burning diesel fuel still emits CO2, but there's a lot of things at the local level, like Virginia, who is considering removing the sales and use tax exemption for data centers. It's kind of a bargaining chip. They want the on-site power generation to move away from fossil fuels. And the answer for the diesel perspective is something called HVO, which is hydro-treated vegetable oil. Think biodiesel, but ultra-clean biodiesel. So that would be a short-term step, like, okay, we cleaned up the pollution. Virginia DEQ already passed a Tier 4 regulation. Then maybe we're looking at insisting that if you're going to run 200 hours, we want you to use a renewable fuel, which HVO qualifies. The natural gas thing is still going to continue growing. I mean, right now, we're not in the turbine business, but I know the large recip engines are 2 years out. And Dan will tell you that you're going to run out of firm gas at some point. So that's kind of an interim step. I'm hopeful, depending on who you talk to from the SMR world, that we're only looking at a 7-year runway between now and when we're looking at that. But I think if you clean up the diesels to every extent that you can and use the natural gas, that's going to be your behind the meter. There's also, obviously, we're owned by private equity called TPG Rise. They're a $30 billion private equity group, fantastic group of guys. But they own a lot of flow battery technology. There's going to be battery solutions. I mean, first time I heard there's a data center not far from here that basically has the philosophy that if the power goes out, we're going to run on our UPS system for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to throw the data, that all the compute that we're doing here, over to a nearby data center that has spare room. I mean, that could very well, that concept could very well expand. So you're looking at different types of batteries that exceed that 4-hour window where we're probably at right now. This is the beauty of the scarcity that we're in right now, is every new mousetrap is getting evaluated. I talked to a guy last week that's heating bricks. Like in New York City, they have a lot of what they call thermal ice storage. So during the night, they create these giant ice blocks when power is cheap and the grid is not strained. And then they blow air over it all day long to cool the building. It's thermal storage.
Right.
But you can do the same thing with bricks, and then heat them up to, I think it was about 1,800 degrees F. Heat them up and then run water over them, create steam, and drive a turbine. I mean, I love the ideas that are coming out. You never know what's going to get the traction. I mean, we were hopeful about hydrogen for a while, but we couldn't get the infrastructure straight.
Right.
What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear.
Well, I've in the past, we have hundreds, as we talked about earlier, of episodes recorded, but because we changed our logo and stuff, it was so hard, it was so interwoven in them, we had to take most of them offline, so we don't have them. But we've had energy storage folks on here. Here's my skepticism, not cynicism, but skepticism.
Okay.
What's attractive to me about a fuel like diesel and whatever replaces it in the future is that I don't have minutes, I have days of standby, basically instantaneous, for all intents and purposes, power. And there is likely, if not certainly in the future, going to be, in the way that the grid is interwoven, data center infrastructure will be interwoven so that, to your point earlier, applications will shift the data around in a way. It will be deduplicated. Down here at Georgia Tech, we've interviewed people that are using synthetic DNA for storage. That's long-term slow storage, but nonetheless, the single greatest storage machine we've ever seen is the human DNA. So they can make synthetic DNA for storage. And it's clunky and hard to do. Think you're Henry Ford an hour after he introduced the automobile to the equine transportation world. They're like, there's no roads. There's no, like, how is this ever going to happen? Will never happen, right? And they just wanted bigger horses. So it's early messy days, but there's no doubt once we understand that crystalline infrastructure, we're going to do it. What I'm skeptical, so storage, but to have grid level, real grid level energy storage, not just for data centers, but for the grid, that is not just a moment, that is safe, locally sourced, it's not a bomb, it's affordable. There may be chemistries that exist in the micro and small level, and I am not an expert in this, so I would love to have some energy storage people on. I've had them on. I'm just skeptical to see it for not just a refrigerator in your house to power your solar infrastructure, your behind the meter, which I love this idea where I don't have to be on the grid normally. I see that in the private sector, the civilian sector. I applaud that when that happens. And so I only need the grid in some situations. But for big industry, I am still skeptical that exists. Now, what I have seen in energy storage, I've seen the big towers where when energy is cheap and they move the blocks up, they stack the blocks, or they use hydro. Like they get these, it's not even concrete. It's a synthetic, very green, very sustainable brick. And they use hydropower to push those bricks up a hill all day long, or they use it to push water up a hill all day long. The water pushes the water. And then at night or whatever, the water is released back down through the fans, which are like, there's all kinds of ingenuity. But that doesn't work inside the Beltway in Philly. It doesn't work like you'd think, right?
Yeah.
I remember my old Sylvester Stallone gang movies of what it looks like, and those parts of the wood. It's probably going to go all dark. Snake, Spilskin, or whatever his name is, Kurt Russell. Like it just go dark anyway. But in all seriousness, how that could work maybe out in the middle of a part of America where a big training data center is being built, and there's not a lot near it anyway. And so you could have infrastructure like that, but it requires space, whether it's horizontal space or it's vertical space. So for all of these things, when I think of how compact that diesel fuel storage is, and in the same way we're going to talk about nuke in a second, and the amount of quick, safe, affordable, reliable energy to give me many minutes of runtime with many people who know how to fix it and operate it, with a bazillion people with tankers to come and go, it is going to have to evolve. I'm just still curious to see what that storage beyond what we know looks like, that people really, and by the way, one of the whole points of all this thing is we do no harm. So what's the total life cycle of making something all the way up to its retirement? To your point earlier about like when people just plug it in the wall, that grid may have metals and whatever that it's emitting somewhere that you're not even aware of. And yet this vegetable biofuel is exponentially cleaner in infrastructure. Granted, it's a much smaller infrastructure. At least that's what we've discussed today. But I don't know what it went into to get the vegetable oil made. Like, what was that? What's the impact to the dirt? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's just these things. And I feel like we should just, with our eyes open, let's not demonize anything. Let's just do it. One of the things I had Allie Kelly on here from the Ray here in Georgia. She drove up in an EV, which I love. Like, I just think they're amazing. I think some of them are ugly as sin, but I love them. And she said, you know what the single biggest pollutant in landfills in America is? Do you know what it is?
Batteries. No?
Not even close. Tires.
I'm sorry?
Tires.
Oh, okay.
Tires. And they last forever. And you know what the consequences of an EV is? Again, now this is a 2-year-old conversation. Could have changed. Again, not anti-EV. Can't wait for mine. One, the weight of it and the way that the torque works today, in general, over generalization, they had to change the compound of the tires because it's so heavy and the torque or whatever. So the tires are more expensive and they last longer. Where? In a landfill. Right? And so, and they're more expensive. So fewer people come by is the idea. Not an expert. This is the contention. So if somebody disagrees, let's have them on here. If everybody in your neighborhood went and hooked up their thing to a fast charger, how many transformers in a neighborhood 20 years older or older, and you look like me wearing that stupid polo shirt here today, this sophisticated seat, live in a neighborhood like me with transformers that are not brand new, I start popping transformers somewhere up the line, right? So now we got to upgrade that infrastructure. What's that? If that sucker catches on fire, how many fire stations in my regular suburban Atlanta area neighborhood can there be that I've got firemen and firewomen and fire infrastructure to put out that fire within 12 to 15 minutes before it becomes the surface of the sun burning my house down? We're not anti any of those things. We love EV. We love the potential. I don't want a gas station up. I want to be able to pull in and have it charge and be safe and whatever. But we're eating on our way to paradise. Like, I don't want to stop the things. We inherit the risks. We got it. Let's do it. But when it comes back to energy storage, as these things continue to evolve for grid level big storage, I think there's still a long way to go when we look at the total cost of the generating of the resources, the consuming of the resources, the space and displacement, the impact to the physical environment, to whales, to birds, to people, to parking lots, whatever. And then the recycling of it when it's reached its end of life, we all agree. I think there's still a lot of room to grow for us to get great at that. And so when I hear, and I'm not an expert in your world, moving from a tier 2 to a tier 4, repurposing. We repurposed a building, a 1 million square foot building down in Atlanta that was one of the original Sears and Roebuck warehouses, 1 million square feet. It was built in the 50s and the 60s, and if anything came out of a Sears catalog, those of you kids not from here or too young don't remember where that was, east of the Mississippi came out of that building. And so it was built like what they call a 200-year building with these giant concrete blocks. Like we would never tear that down because the waste, like the carbon's already been spent. So let's repurpose it exponentially more efficiently, working to get to a PUE of 1 ultimately. It's probably a 1.4, maybe even less in the new infrastructure now that we've built out there. How do we get that more efficient? So to repurpose things, I see amazing. For these new introductions, I cannot wait to see them, but I think that they are still living in places like MIT and Georgia Tech and whatever at the grid level, at massive gigawatts level. It's inevitable. I just think we're still early days. So what do I think? That's what I think.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the good news is we have the best minds working on it, clearly. This battery discussion has been going on for quite a while.
And they're eager. One of the things I love that sometimes gets missed, you just brought it up about intermittent energy sources. Nobody here is anti any of those things.
No.
Let's do it all. Why not? How amazing is it? We fund them, not just for PR. We fund them. We want it. It has to fit the workload we're doing, but let's do it. We get some of the most creative, curious, trying to solve it problem, love SOP, MOP. We're now attracting people from oil and gas who love to blow stuff up and experiment with it. And they're called wildcatters for a reason. Those knuckleheads started with John Wayne, his crazy boom arm caterpillar. Like all of it, bring it. We attract people that run nuclear subs and swim underneath them to scrub them clean. Come on. We want to be safe. Everybody's got to go home with all the parts that they brought with them. And we want to service the economy of the world and the education and health. Absolutely. And this feels like one of the places where that experimentation is allowed to happen. I'm eager for it. We're eager for it. You're eager for it. But I just think that while we're on this path, let's make what we've got as efficient as possible as we move to these things and get them incorporated so that we're not doing what we did. No shade at the EPA 20 years ago where I'm responding to a crisis. And so with the staff that I have working 10 times more hours than they ever expected, we come up with an incomplete thing that we're rectifying 20 years later. I know we're going to do that. We did with our Constitution, had to come up with the Bill of Rights and other things. We'll keep evolving. But that's how I feel. I just feel like let's make sure that these things that are tried and true, that are safe, that are affordable, that are doable, let's keep iterating on them, getting the maximum out of that as we evolve the new things. And I think it can get difficult in this gold rush that we live in now. What's real and what's marketing? My friend Sarah Keller, formerly of Uber, now at Microsoft, said, we were talking about AI. She said, everybody shows up and talks to us about an AI story. Everybody's got an AI story. 90% of them, it's somebody else's story that they've repackaged. And the remaining 10%, 8%, 80% of that is a incomplete. 2 to 3% or whatever the percentages were. A small percentage is amazing. It's mind-boggling. It's worth sorting through all the 98% before it. But don't get caught up in the hype. There is value and incredible innovation, but most of it isn't. You just got to sort through it. And that's what I think where we're at with some of these things. I cannot wait till somebody shows up here or in one of our sister podcasts and demonstrates for us, because I think it's going to be like that. I think it's going to be a tsunami. It's coming, maybe overnight. It's here, and it's unbelievable. Yeah. And then we're implementing it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, open-minded, be curious. Don't be cynical. When I mentioned these great minds, I mean, there's wherever you are on Elon. I mean, Elon's a genius, right. And he's been working on storage for... Who
sets himself on fire every other day. Doesn't mean he's not a genius, but yes, I agree.
He's been working on it for 10 years, and whether you're a musketeer or not, we have some really smart people working on it, and there hasn't quite been that breakthrough. But at our age, I still get excited when someone shows up and shows me a box of bricks that's connected to a steam turbine. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Because the emissions are negligible. And
Absolutely. And I think that's where it's going to be. It's going to be all of these micro experiments. It's when we get to scale. How do we do this at scale? And how do we do it in a way? And it's not if, it's when. We're going to do it. It's going to happen. It's probably in process of happening. But that's just it. I think we're sorting through that. So moving from storage, let's go to our favorite. We don't have that much. We've been talking for a minute. Small modular reactors. What do you think about? I guess my question is, or do we even need to talk about that? Like as we're moving to what the ultimate energy sources, or maybe not ultimate. I hate to say one's going to be the absolute known. This isn't VHS or beta tapes, which both are long gone now. But what role do you think small modular reactors, microreactors, regular nuclear plants, when you think about that, if you think about it or you listen to other people talk about it, when is it? What's its role? What do you think? We're ear deep in the crystal ball now.
It's fun to talk about. I believe that there's universal acceptance that it's the long-term goal.
Mm-hmm. Inevitability, yeah. I would argue.
It comes down. I should never use the expression "pick your poison." So people need priorities. Right. So if their priorities are, I can use maps on my phone and I have to deal with this data center, okay. And my story about the idea that the transmission line, would you rather the diesels run 20 miles away from you for 200 hours a year, or would you want that transmission line to go through your backyard? So that's a priority. I'm choosing that. Mm-hmm. We're going to find out how quickly how serious people are about greenhouse gases when the nukes show up. Because people are going to say, I don't want talk about a PR problem. Mm-hmm. I mean, data centers now are coming up with their entire community engagement teams internally. Right. The NDA is gone the way of the dodo bird, and now we've got these community engagement teams. What is that discussion going to look like in the neighborhood where you're like, oh, that is a modular reactor. This is how safe it is. Don't watch that Jane Fonda movie, and don't believe everything you hear. That's a shift in a mindset that's even more substantial than diesel. So then you have to ask, okay, well, this is zero greenhouse gases. This is what you wanted, a grid that is renewable. Is that more important to you, or no more nukes is more important to you? Mm-hmm. And that's going to be the tricky part of it all. I think the technology will be there. Thank God for the Navy. Otherwise, we would have nobody trained in nuclear right now. So I really believe that we can come to the forefront. I left MIRATECH for a little while, and I came back in 2019. But I was at Southern Company, subsidiary of Southern Company. So I was there during Vogtle, when they were building Vogtle.
Which is a nuclear plant in Georgia.
So I got to be listening in on all those discussions. I certainly had nothing to add, but
right.
I could listen in. And it took a tremendous commitment, a lot of public backlash, and over budget 3X, right. You just had to believe in what you were doing. And that's what it's going to be. It's going to take some pioneers. It's going to take some very brave people to make that work.
Yeah. Here's where I'm spectacularly hopeful. I just think we're way earlier than we think. I have 3 daughters, all in their 20s. There are a few things we agree on. They love their parents, even though they are convinced we are idiots. And every now and then we do something, like have a big tape on our hand to demonstrate our lack of clarity. They do not, and I've said this on the podcast before, they chuckle at it. We do not have the same faith tradition. We do not have the same political outlook. We don't, there's a lot of things just in the world, how we see the world, that we don't have in common. Probably not an uncommon story. A year or two ago, when Microsoft went and said, hey, we want to restart the nuke plant out here in the east. And there were a number of people, and it was almost like a thermocline to your Navy reference. If you're this age and older, the further you went up from that thermocline, the more resistant you got to that. Wait a minute, that's that place with the big accidents, and that's the place where there's trouble. The closer you were to the line, you're like, was there an accident or something with that? Well, I'm not sure how I feel about that. But the further you got away from it, like, this is going to be a disaster. And that was irregardless of your, in my experience, of your political ideology. Like, no, they shut that place down, or that place was a problem, because the further you went below that line, closer to people that would pay attention to it, teenagers. But certainly in my kids' case in the 20s, they thought it was cool. Like, makes total sense. I about fell out of that chair. I was like, what? Oh, yeah. Makes total sense. Papa, we need the power. Like, how are we going to do anything without the power? Nuclear is super safe. And walked out of the room. There's no demystifying. There is no PR. There is no whatever. Now, they will rail against certain LLMs and whatever, but nuclear power, not even. And my kids aren't uneducated. They're like, yeah, it makes total sense. We've talked about this in school. We've talked about this in other places. It makes sense. They should have talked about this other stuff in school too. If you could just balance your budget, that'd be wonderful. Get off my payroll. But it was shocking. And so perhaps they will have the PR program. But the difference between that and data centers, for example, my kids feel like they're inoculated to me. So if somebody shows up, a professional or even maybe a concerned citizen who's fearful and says, hold on, before we go do, maybe not a Vogel, which is a 4 gigawatt, if I remember correctly, or they have the potential to get up to 4, maybe larger, hundreds and hundreds of acres. We're talking about small modular reactors or microreactors, much smaller, whatever that looks like deployed. At least my first blush in more than just that one. That's not anecdotal for me. That's direct. I've had some other anecdotal experiences. Yeah. Like, it seems not in our industry, not connected to it, other than loosely through somebody who looks like Lord Farquaad. Like, it's just not really a big deal. So I feel like when people come up concerned, getting louder, but not with complete information, at least my crew is like, tell me more. Why do you think that? Because here's what I understand. And that's not me confronting or the energy people confronting or whatever. So maybe that's, my little tidal pool over here is not indicative of the main thing.
I think you're right. It's clearly generational. I was in 5th grade when 3 Mile Island happened, and I was in Connecticut on a family trip, and I remember my parents watching the news saying, we're not going to go back to Pennsylvania. Right.
Yeah. And now, but when you go back and you ask people what happened at 3 Mile Island, you'd never get that. It's like everybody was at Woodstock. And you're like, wait a minute, the truth.
My daughter asked how many people were killed. And I'm like, none.
None. And this was the outcome, right? These are the things that, so if something's true and it's equal to or worse, let's call that out.
Right.
Let's just get to the truth. Like, let not just, I always run into data center people that are, no matter what we say, they don't care. They're selling the land. They're like, we're all in. And other people, no matter what you say, Greenpeace, not the founder of Greenpeace, who I understand is actually pro-nuclear, because he's trying to get to an agenda. But many of the people, I'm not close enough to this, but setting Greenpeace aside, whoever, there are groups out there that say, and I'm not in the nuclear power business, but they'll push back against things. Look, let's just let the truth get on stage. And if the truth is, the evaluation of it is, actually, that is not good for us. Maybe down the road, but it isn't now. Well, then let's not do it. Yeah. Just because it's here doesn't mean it's wrong to get rid of it. And just because it's new doesn't mean it's wrong to not embrace it. Like, let them compete. As the phrase goes, as iron sharpens iron. And then we move forward with clarity. But that's so much momentum is built around these half-truths that they become Sasquatch. And I think part of our effort is let's help distill at least what we know is factually not true.
Did you ever see that YouTube video of Michael Schellenberger 10 years ago talking about nuke? Look it up. It's amazing. It's got several million views. But before anybody who knew Michael Schellenberger was, he did this podcast about exactly what we're talking about. All these misconceptions about nuclear and how it's the answer. And it was brave at the time. Yeah. I mean, because it was 10 or 15 years ago. But now everybody seems to be coming around. You're right. It's generational.
They're at least entertaining it, right? And there's fertile ground for at least they would have to be re-persuaded that the modern nuclear design is unsafe and unhelpful. They're not predisposed to it. And that's all we want. Like if it is unsafe and it is unhelpful, in spite of what our good friend Tony Grayson says, who we love, in spite of other people, maybe Schellenberger, whoever, like I just want, okay, I'll start off with, I know this person and that person, they seem trustworthy. Let's hear what they have to say. But if the facts confront it and change my mind, they change my mind.
Yeah.
But that's just what we want. Like we need energy sovereignty as a people.
Absolutely.
We need data sovereignty as a people. We need a common unifying mission and purpose as a people, or we start to disintegrate, and we see a little bit of that in the news now. So we need these things in order to be part of the modern world. And so with that in mind, as you're looking forward before our next conversation that we have, what should we be thinking about, or what are you thinking about? What are you as you just look at whether it's in the things that we talked about today as it relates to our industry, what's coming up soon and quick, and what should we be on the looking out for in the next 18 to 24 months?
Yeah, I mean, people probably are going to think that I wake up every day and I put a diesel black hat on and I'm the villain.
At least diesel headphones.
Short of selling asbestos at these conferences, I walk around and, I evangelize diesel and people just stare at me like, really? But I want to be the educator along the lines of what can be done with this resource that is already so good. If the Achilles heel of diesel is just the emissions, we can go a long way with that. And it's just the perfect fit for this short-term solution. Okay. And I also want to be an advocate for our industry. I mean, again, everybody's suffering right now from a PR. There is more cancellations of data centers in the first 4 months of this year than there were all of last year. There's states that are coming out with moratoriums. We have to really get out there and educate the masses on what we're doing and our intentions, because our intentions are obviously, if you look at what we've done for the wind and solar industry, we were proactive in these green commitments. So we never wanted to let society go by the wayside where we do what we want to do to make money. I really think that we've had the best intentions from the beginning.
Yeah. My CEO said not long ago, if you go to the communities that we've been in for any length of time, my company, QTS, we're the heroes.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's self-grandizing. Go talk to the mayors. Go talk to the civic leaders. Go talk to them, not us, not our PR. And administrations have changed because in some of them we've been there over 20 years. Yeah. Just go talk to them and see how we're involved, see how we interconnect, see what value we bring. And that is a compelling story. So if you were to wrap up almost 2 hours of conversation today, what is it you want to make sure, if they leave with nothing else, what do you want to make sure people leave today from this conversation knowing what, even if they need to go investigate it, what is it that you want them to take away from our conversation?
I just want to back up what you just said. We have an office in Newcastle in UK, and the reception to your group getting there has been nothing but positive. Yeah. And there's a notion, I go to a lot of these forums where people talk about how few people work at a data center. So yes, there's security people, there's some operations people. Once the construction is done, there's very few people pulling in the parking lot every day. However, there's an industry like ours, pollution control on backup diesel generators. We're 700 people now, which is crazy. I was one of the 4. There's 700 people now. And that's an entire industry that exists on the back of data centers. So it's similar to automotive, the invention of the car. There's entire people that make tires and brakes. And so even though there's not a lot of people pulling into that parking lot every day, that the operations at that data center are clearly supporting infrastructure and small business throughout this country. We used to say we were a small business. We're not small business anymore, which is the end goal most of the time anyway.
Right.
But if overarching, I'm not saying be more like Dave and I, but keeping an open mind, setting aside preconceived notions about things like diesel or nuke or batteries or anything. We really should look at this and say, all right, every potential solution's on the table, and don't say, oh, dirty diesel, or that's not an option. And we're all pulling for the same thing. The end goal is we don't want to be relying on somebody else's AI. We want to be independent. We want to be, I filled up my gas tank yesterday. We want to be energy independent and sovereign in such a way. And I'm not afraid of AI on any level. I really think when AI is incorporated into the grid, when you go to PJM and you say, PJM, okay, here's your capacity. Here are the 2,000 generation sources, because the solar on your house is something that PJM has to say, yeah, that's a generation source. On this day, in this moment, with everything that's going on, dispatch the cleanest, least expensive, most reliable resources. That could very well be the diesel at the data center. I believe it will be. So people are saying, well, dirty diesel, we don't want to run that. Okay, fine. Take the emotion out of it. Let AI at the grid level dispatch just the cleanest, cheapest thing, and everybody wins.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I love ending a conversation where everybody wins. Jim, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks. This is a treat, and it's been fun. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Hey, if you liked that conversation, hit the like button. And if you loved it, hit the subscribe button. We'll see you next time, everybody. Have a good one.